Life is short, but we don't really think about it that much, do we? Unless something happened that really shook us and reminded us of our own mortality. Just the other day, I heard that a friend of mine, who I was planning to visit early next year in Seattle, died suddenly from a massive heart attack. And on that same day, I also heard that a classmate of my nephew died of cancer at the age of 11. Indeed, life is short. And the older we get, the more it feels like each day is bringing us closer and closer to our last. And because life is short, we want to make the most of it. So we plan our lives. Now imagine this is your timeline as an adult here on earth. Typically, you first plan for your education. So if you want to become a civil engineer, for instance, then you study civil engineering. And then after graduation, you start to plan for your career. And then later on, as you become more financially stable and ready to handle more personal responsibilities, you start thinking about getting married and having a family of your own. And many years later, as you get older, you prepare for your retirement. So this is a typical adult timeline for many people. Now, let's look at another timeline. But this time, let's look at it in the context of eternity. This tiny, small portion here, marked by 2 white vertical lines, is our earthly life. The other much, much bigger portion of the timeline, the yellow line, up to infinity, is our eternal life. And yet, many of us focus their attention on their earthly life alone. That eternal mindset is simply not there. At this point, let me ask you, do you have an eternal life plan? Do you have a plan in place for your eternal destiny? You want to go to heaven, right? Do you have a plan on how to get there? Only saints make it to heaven. So, do you have a plan on how to become a saint? If you don't have one, don't despair. Countless others don't have one. I don't even have one either. All I do is to strive to do what is right and what I believe is pleasing to God. All I have is the intention to be and to do good. And there's really nothing wrong with that. A lot of people have intentions of doing what is right. But then, later on, I realized that God has already given us a blueprint for an eternal life plan. Even Pope Francis, in his exhortation and call to holiness entitled Rejoice and Be Glad, talks about this blueprint. So, I started making an eternal life plan based on this blueprint. I read and reflected on Pope Francis' exhortation and call to holiness. I read and reflected on certain Bible passages about eternal life and sanctification. I also read a lot of Christian books about holiness. I took a lot of notes, consulted my pastor and another priest who is like a brother to me. And most of all, I prayed and I prayed for wisdom and guidance. Well, the plan is not completely done yet, but now I have the structure all written down, and I want to share it with you. Benjamin Franklin supposedly once said, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. It simply means that planning is important, and that if you don't plan, paradoxically, you are actually planning, but to fail. I firmly believe that the journey to heaven The journey to holiness is easier if we take this journey together as one community, all working towards one major goal, to become saints. Holiness is more achievable as a community. Much of our spiritual growth comes in the context of relationships, not just with God, but with others. We need each other. We need to hold each other's hand as we travel this difficult but rewarding path to holiness. And with God's grace, I know we can finish this journey to the end. I invite you to join me on this journey. In my next video, I will show you the structure of a plan to holiness based on God's blueprint. It's not set in stone, and I know we would be tweaking it along the way, so I would need some input from you. And perhaps you already have a plan on how to get to heaven, and you are already implementing it. That is awesome. I certainly would like to hear from you. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.